There is a number that most people planning a retirement home never hear from their contractor, and when you see it for the first time, you will understand exactly why nobody leads with it. The average American senior spends somewhere between $2,800 and $4,200 every single winter just keeping a conventional house warm. Not a mortgage payment, not a repair bill, just the furnace running from November through March, burning through money that was supposed to carry a person through the rest of their life. And on a fixed income, that number does not stay polite. It climbs a little every year, right alongside whatever utility rate increase showed up in last October's bill and the one that will show up next October without asking permission. But there is a quiet group of retired men who have figured out how to cut that number down to almost nothing. Not by living in a cramped box. Not by giving up a real kitchen or a proper bedroom or a space that actually feels like a home someone chose on purpose. By building a structure that was shaped by mathematics and physics, not by tradition and habit. A curved steel arch that sheds wind naturally, holds heat with almost no mechanical help, and performs in a hard winter the way a conventional box house simply cannot. I am going to show you 3 specific mini Quonset models today. 3 buildings available right now, designed for exactly the kind of man who is done writing oversized checks to a utility company every month for a house that fights the weather instead of working with it. But before I name the first model, you need to understand the single thing that makes all 3 of them perform the way they do. Because without this piece, you could buy any Quonset on the market and still end up with a heating bill that surprises you every January for the rest of your life. It all comes down to the arch. A conventional house is a box, flat walls, flat ceiling, corners in every room, and a roof sitting on top of the whole thing like a lid. Every corner is a cold spot where air stagnates and walls lose heat faster than anywhere else on the structure. Every flat exterior wall is a surface the winter wind can push against for hours while your furnace runs trying to keep up. Every square foot of flat ceiling is a place where warm air pools and presses upward, looking for a crack or a gap to escape through to the outside. The geometry itself is working against you from November through March. A Quonset changes all of that because the structure is one unbroken curve running from the ground on one side to the ground on the other, and that curve is not just a visual choice. Warm air rises, and in a curved interior, it follows the arch right back down toward the living space, instead of pushing against a flat surface and looking for a way out. Wind hits the curve and deflects instead of pressing. Snow slides off under its own weight instead of piling up on your roof deck. And because the steel panels lock together along that arch, the cold air infiltration that bleeds warmth out of a conventional house every single night has almost nowhere to enter in the first place. That shape is the reason a man named Gary, who retired to the Colorado high country 3 years ago, told me his January heating bill came in under $60. Not $60 a week. $60 for the entire month of January in Colorado. Gary is not running a wood stove. He is not doing anything exotic or unusual. He built the right shape on a piece of land that gets genuinely hard winters, and the arch handles the rest. Hold that number in your head, because by the time we get to the third model, you are going to understand down to the dollar exactly where it comes from. Now here is what nobody in the Quonset business is going to put on the front page of their website. Not every model makes sense for a retired household, and the size of the building matters more than almost any other single decision you will make. A large commercial Quonset, the kind designed for equipment storage or a light fabrication operation, is excellent for that purpose. But a man named Tom, who is looking for a comfortable, low-maintenance retirement home, does not need a massive open bay to heat and cool every month of the year. The models that actually work for seniors are the smaller ones. The ones scaled for real daily living, smarter floor plans, and a thermal envelope tight enough to keep utility costs in a range that does not require a conversation about the thermostat every morning. 3 models stand out right now above everything else on the market, and I am going to give you the honest picture on every one of them, including the parts that do not show up in the promotional photography. The first is the Steelmaster 16 by 30. That is 480 square feet of finished interior space. And before you decide that number sounds too small to be worth your time, hear what a man named Dennis found out when he built one on his property in rural Tennessee. There are no interior load-bearing walls inside a Quonset. That single fact changes everything about how the space actually feels. Dennis told me that 480 square feet inside his Steelmaster felt more open than the 650 square foot apartment he rented in his early 50s, because nothing was chopping the floor plan into disconnected little rooms he walked through once a week. The arch gives the center of the interior a ceiling height that a flat-ceiling conventional house at the same square footage simply cannot match, and that height changes the entire feeling of the space from the moment you walk in. Dennis put a small storage loft above the rear wall for seasonal gear, kept the main floor completely open, and ended up with a functional kitchen, a comfortable sitting area, and a proper bedroom zone separated by a single half wall. He framed out himself over a weekend using standard lumber from the home center down the road. The shell package for this model runs under $15,000 in most markets right now. Assembly uses standard hand tools. Steelmaster provides the hardware and the instruction manual, and a man who can read a diagram and turn a wrench does not need a specialty crew on site to put it up. Total finished cost, meaning real insulation, a mini-split heat pump, flooring and working plumbing, lands most people between $40,000 and $65,000, depending on local labor rates and land preparation. For that money, Dennis has a permanent home that is completely paid for, costs almost nothing to heat, and requires no exterior painting schedule, no roof replacement fund, and no rotting wood to address on weekends. He told me his worst heating month last winter was $44. He said he looked at the bill a second time before he was willing to accept it was right. But here is what I want you to carry with you as we move to the second model. What Dennis solved by sourcing and installing insulation himself, the next company bakes directly into the building before it ever leaves the factory. And that single difference is what makes the second model worth paying close attention to, because it eliminates the most common place where a first-time Quonset build goes sideways and turns into an expensive education. The second model is the Rhino Steel QB20, 20 feet wide and 40 feet deep, giving you 800 square feet of finished living space. Rhino builds the QB20 with a prefabricated closed-cell spray foam panel system that handles the steel arch and the full thermal insulation in one integrated step. Most Quonset buyers purchase the bare steel shell first and then source their insulations separately, which works perfectly well, but adds time, planning, and room for the kind of mistake that shows up later as a cold wall in February or a moisture problem the following spring. The QB20 ships with foam panels bonded directly to the interior surface of the steel arch, which means the moment the building is sealed up, the thermal envelope is already complete. A man named Robert put one of these up in western Montana last spring with his son and a single rented lift. 9 days from first panel to a fully insulated shell standing on the foundation. 9 days in Montana. Now here is why that foam changes everything on your utility bill, because this is the part that explains Gary's $60 January. Standard fiberglass bats slow heat loss by trapping air in their fibers. Closed-cell foam stops air movement entirely and creates a continuous barrier that fiberglass and even open-cell foam cannot match, under real-world conditions. In a genuinely cold climate, that difference appears directly on your utility statement every single month for as long as you own the building. Robert said he ran his wall heater twice during January, and his interior temperature never dropped below 67 degrees through the whole month. His nearest neighbor, in a stick-built ranch house of comparable size, paid just over $400 in propane that same month. The QB20 shell and foam panel package runs around $22,000 in most markets. Robert's total finished build came in just under $80,000, which in western Montana right now will not purchase a used double-wide in decent condition. Here, it buys a permanent steel structure on a concrete foundation with a 40-year panel warranty and a thermal performance that custom builders simply cannot come close to at double the cost. Now, if both of those models have been making sense, but you want a home with real room to live in every single day, the third one is what I would point a retired man toward without hesitation. Because this model was not designed for someone who is reluctantly giving something up. It was built from the beginning for the person who has made a deliberate decision to stop owning more house than they actually use, without surrendering a single comfort the word home is supposed to mean. The third model is the General Steel Quonset cabin series in the 24x48 configuration. That is 1,152 square feet under a single arched roof, and General Steel has been in this business long enough to understand what a man in his late 60s genuinely needs in a floor plan he is going to wake up inside every day. The standard layout options include a full master bedroom suite at one end of the arch, an open great room and kitchen running through the center, a second flexible room that works as a guest space or a dedicated hobby room depending on your life, and a covered entry at the far end. A man named Frank, who spent 30 years in mechanical contracting before he retired and built one of these in the Texas Hill Country, told me the design felt like the first floor plan he had ever looked at that was built for the person who would actually live there. No stairs to negotiate at 2 in the morning. No formal dining room, sitting empty, collecting dust and burning heating dollars. No HOA with opinions about his property. Frank paid $28,000 for the General Steel shell package. His total finished build came in at $112,000, which included a full HVAC system, a septic installation, a covered front porch he framed out himself, and a 400-square-foot attached shop he built from leftover panels that arrived with the main order at no additional material cost. His monthly heating and cooling runs between $55 and $90 year-round in Central Texas, across every season. Frank said the hardest single part of the entire project was picking up the phone to call a real estate agent about his previous house. Everything that happened after that phone call was straightforward. Now here is the part that belongs in every Quonset conversation and quietly gets left out. A Quonset shell is not a finished home. What you are purchasing is an extremely intelligent structural envelope, and everything inside it is still your job to plan and pay for. Foundation work, plumbing rough-in, electrical installation, insulation if it is not prefabricated into the panel system you ordered, interior framing for rooms and closets, flooring, and every fixture in the kitchen and bathroom. That is where the real project budget lives and breathes. A man who approaches this expecting a $20,000 house is going to encounter a financial reality that his retirement savings were not arranged to handle. Budget honestly for the complete finished build, including everything inside the shell, and you will end up with one of the most energy-efficient and lowest maintenance homes in your entire county. Budget only for the steel, and you will end up with a beautiful curved structure on a slab that needs a second project to become somewhere a person can actually live. Permits are part of this process and are not a reason for concern, but they require a phone call before anything else moves forward. Most counties permit a permanent Quonset, the same way they handle any site-built residential structure, and all three manufacturers I named today work with buyers regularly through local approval processes. What you want to verify before you fall in love with a specific piece of land is the zoning designation on that parcel, because some residential zones do restrict permanent metal structures. That is not a reason to abandon the idea. It is a question you ask before you write a deposit. And in a humid climate, condensation on bare steel is a genuine consideration that deserves a direct answer. Raw steel collects moisture in warm, humid air, the same way a cold glass sweats on a July afternoon. The prefabricated foam panel system in the Rhino QB20 addresses this at the factory by creating a complete thermal break between the exterior steel surface and the interior living space. If you are working with a bare shell and adding insulation yourself, every inch of exposed interior steel needs to be covered before you close up the walls. Leave a gap and you will have moisture problems that no amount of heating will solve. None of that changes the fundamental picture. It is the honest version of the picture, which is the only version worth having before you commit your retirement savings to any decision. If this is the kind of straight conversation you have been looking for and not finding in most places, subscribe right now. A new video goes up every single week, built exactly the same way, with nothing smoothed over, because it made the product look more complicated than a brochure wants it to look. So there are your three. The Steelmaster 16x30 for the man who wants to simplify his life down to exactly what he needs and spend almost nothing maintaining it. The Rhino QB20 for the man who wants a thermal envelope that performs in the worst winter his county has ever recorded, without doing a single thing himself to make it happen. And the General Steel 24x48 for the man who wants every comfort the word home is supposed to mean without a single square foot he does not use. 3 models, 3 price points, and every one of them built on the same principle. The arch is smarter than the box. It always has been. And the men who understood that early have been sitting in warm houses paying almost nothing for years, while the rest of the neighborhood argues about what thermostat setting is worth the argument. Gary is paying $60 in January in Colorado. Dennis is paying $44 in Tennessee. Frank is running between 55 and 90 year-round in Texas. Now you know exactly what they know and exactly which 3 models are worth picking up the phone about first.